but in recent months we've seen a handful of radical left judges effectively try to overrule the rightful powers of the president to stop the American people from getting the policies that they voted for. Thanks for this decision, and thanks to this decision, we can now promptly file to proceed with numerous policies that have been wrongly enjoined on a nationwide basis. And some of the cases we're talking about would be ending birthright citizenship, which now comes to the fore. That was meant for the babies of slaves. This really brings back the Constitution. This is what it's all about.
That was President Trump taking a well-deserved victory lap after months of dealing with judges undermining his executive actions. The Supreme Court issued a 6-3 ruling in a landmark birthright citizenship case that disarmed the left of their favorite weapon, nationwide injunctions enacted by activists with a gavel. These are the judicial joyrides where a single unelected judge, often handpicked by blue state senators, slammed the brakes on President Trump's America First agenda. Well, that's not going to happen anymore. Justice Amy Coney Barrett, writing for the conservative majority, said enough of this colossal abuse of power. The ruling clips the wings of judges in Maryland, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and D.C. who tried to block President Trump's bold executive orders, and this particular one on birthright citizenship. Far-left Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor is already gaslighting people, citing, "No right is safe in the new legal regime the court creates." To illustrate the absurdity, over 170 lawsuits have been filed against President Trump's 200-plus executive actions since Inauguration Day. It's like a judicial jihad. But today, the court said injunctions must stick to the plaintiffs, not the entire nation. Excellent work by the Solicitor General John Sauer. AG Pam Bondi is cheering, and we are so here for it. Joining us now, managing partner at M.R. Parker Law, Michael Parker. So, Michael, what does this big ruling from the Supreme Court mean for the future of nationwide injunctions?
Yeah, so a lot of people think that this case was about birthright citizenship in the Supreme Court right now. And what it was really about was nationwide injunctions. And just to educate your viewers on what a nationwide injunction is, it's when a district court judge makes a ruling that affects the law across the entire country. Now, there's 677 district court judges, and each one has their own political opinions, their own views on things, and really they're supposed to rule in their own little geographic region, right? They're supposed to rule on the cases and controversies in front of them and not national policy. So the problem is that prior to the 20th century, there were no nationwide injunctions. And during the civil rights movement, courts began to slowly issue nationwide injunctions to have an effect on policy. They were essentially legislating from the bench. And this slowed down a little bit. But then under the Bush administration, we got 6 of them. Under the Obama administration, we got 12. And under Donald Trump's first administration, there were 80 of them. And Democrats were using these to essentially affect policy, right? They were upset with immigration policy. They were upset with a lot of things the Trump administration was doing. So we saw during the first Trump administration, the heavy use of these nationwide injunctions. So what the Supreme Court was ruling on in this case was the very limited scope of whether or not district court judges could influence national policy through these nationwide injunctions. And the court said resoundingly no. It was a 6-3 decision. The court essentially said that district courts can only rule on cases and controversies in front of them. If an individual has an issue with a law, the court can rule specifically to them, but cannot issue a nationwide injunction. The point of a district court is to rule on specific parties. If there's going to be a nationwide injunction, that is for the appellate process and more specifically the Supreme Court.
Will this reduce forum shopping, where litigants just go to find a particular judge so that they can get a question presented that might thereafter affect the whole country?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what's happening, right? Like you could be a plaintiff in, Arkansas, you go to Hawaii and get a Hawaiian judge to issue a ruling that has a nationwide effect and it'll affect you in Arkansas. So what plaintiffs end up doing is that they go to judges who have favorable views to them. They present the case to those judges. And then some of these judges, I'm not saying all of them are activist judges, and they're going to try to influence policies based on their beliefs. And if the plaintiff finds the right judge, they're able to forum shop to get the result they want, and they're able to stop national policy. And national policy should be dictated by the people we vote for, not the judges who are appointed. Judges are there to enforce the law, not to make it. And these nationwide injunctions are essentially political maneuvers to change national policy.
And that really was what was interesting about this question. It really posited this theory that every single federal judge could be the arbiter of national policy, or whether or not they had to be more humble in thinking about their jurisdiction. I've read a lot of cases, as I know you have. The level of angst in these justices toward one another. I mean, Ketanji Brown Jackson had a very shrill dissent, but we saw Amy Coney Barrett writing for the majority saying that judges can't have an oversized role in the administration of every executive action. Where do you think this leaves our system of checks and balances?
I mean, I think it's going to improve the condition of the country. I think when you have, like I said, there's 677 district court judges, and I think about 500 magistrate judges. There's so much uncertainty when any one of those judges can issue a nationwide injunction and halt national policy. So I think where it's going to leave us is a lot more certainty on what the law is and a lot more discourse on whether laws are constitutional or not. And one of the reasons why you don't want nationwide injunctions is because you want courts from all over the country to rule on specific issues. And then what happens is the Supreme Court gathers all those rulings, all the district court rulings, all the circuit court rulings, and they have a lot of views and opinions and case law that they can look at and then analyze the situation in a much more informed light. So I think it's going to give us a lot more certainty. I think it's going to give the Supreme Court a much stronger ability to analyze problems, the constitutionality of questions, and make the right decisions. I think we're going to be in a much better position than we were prior to this case.
You're right that birthright citizenship was the matter that brought this broader question to the court. I'm wondering, now that the ruling has been released, what the status is of the nationwide injunctions that have been issued, on things like hiring practices or DEI or USAID. Do those get dissolved automatically? Do the litigants have to seek their dissolution through some action as a result of what the Supreme Court has said?
I mean, I would argue that they are dissolved immediately, but I think that's going to be an issue to be resolved in the lower courts, and I think that's going to make it back to the Supreme Court at some point. I think people are going to argue that those orders stay into effect. I think some people are going to argue that they're dissolved immediately, or some will even argue that you just have to go in and petition for it to be resolved. So I just don't know what the outcome is going to be, but I know there's going to be litigation, surrounding it. What'll be more interesting, though, is what happens with the question of birthright citizenship.
Yes.
I mean, that's one of the hot button issues right now. I know a lot of people look at the 14th Amendment and say that, it specifically grants the right of birthright citizenship, and others say that was only meant to affect, freed slaves and to give them the right of citizenship. So I think that's going to be the next big issue that's going to go through the courts, and I'm really interested to see what the Supreme Court does with it.
Yeah, let's just spend a moment on that, because we are going to encounter a circumstance, I guess, in the very near future where in some jurisdictions there might be birthright citizenship, and in others there wouldn't be. That would create a conflict in the various circuits and in the appellate regime, and thus the Supreme Court would have to answer that question. But in the interim, does birthright citizenship get suspended as a consequence of this ruling, or do the lower courts have to wade through that?
I mean, so from what my understanding is, Trump issued Executive Order 14160, which essentially eliminated birthright citizenship. So at the time it was signed, the federal government was no longer recognizing birthright citizenship. And then the court issued, several courts issued nationwide injunctions. So if those get dissolved, then the presumption would be that that executive order is still in effect, that there is no birthright citizenship. But the court's ruling doesn't foreclose district courts from giving individual relief to plaintiffs. So you could go to the district court, you could file a motion, right, to rule that the law is unconstitutional and should not be applied to you. And you could get citizenship potentially, right? And then all of those challenges will work their way through the circuit courts, the Fifth Circuit, the 11th Circuit, the Ninth Circuit, the Federal Circuit. They'll get to the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court will have to resolve all of those differences. And that's typically how things work, right? There was the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, where in some states you could get text messages without consent, some you couldn't. And it just depended what circuit you were in. And then there was a Facebook case where the Supreme Court resolved all those issues. It's going to work the exact same as that.
And how hilarious will it be if a lot of these sanctuary jurisdictions, a lot of these places where you have the more left-leaning judges, they have everyone rushing to those jurisdictions to have their anchor babies? It'd be quite something. Michael R. Parker, M.R. Parker Law. Go right ahead.
I was just going to say, it's really interesting because just Democrats are very upset about this. They've spent the last 100 years waving in illegal immigrants like a third base coach, and they are very unhappy with these, new laws regarding birthright citizenship. And I think you're right. I think all these sanctuary cities are going to get inundated with immigrants and people, and they're going to lack the resources to deal with it.
Michael R. Parker, M.R. Parker Law, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your expertise.
Yeah, of course, Matt. It was a pleasure. Thanks so much.